Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, the review guy reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the new Nothing Nowhere record entitled Trauma Factory. For the entire timeline of this channel, I have made it abundantly clear that Nothing Nowhere is my favorite solo artist, probably the one that is the most important to me personally. As an avid follower of him, someone that has put hours upon hours upon hours into his discography, into researching him, I would say that I'm a decent source of credible information for Nothing Nowhere in the sense that just I have put so much into this artist for years. Some of his releases in the past have been better than others, but I would say that out of Reaper and Ruiner, those are two records that I can go back to so much and still get so much out of, and EPs like Bloodlust have a lot to give as well, and I think his early discography is pretty slept on. That being said, after 3 years, we finally have a brand new Nothing Nowhere record. 15 tracks and 41 minutes of probably his most eclectic soundscapes that he has ever crafted. This really is a smorgasbord. It is an amalgamation of so many things. Looking into the background of this record and his approach coming into it makes it very clear to me that what he was hoping to do is return back to his roots but still be adventurous and have fun and just make the type of tunes that he wanted to make. He wasn't necessarily abiding by one certain rule set, and he wasn't pigeonholing himself either into one corner to sound like one thing exclusively. And I think that that shows in the stripped back approach, the repetition, sort of the minimalistic approach that some of these tracks take. While Trauma Factory is a very real record that dives into a lot of human emotion and shows Joe at some of his most vulnerable moments, I also think that it raises a lot of imbalance both from a production standpoint and has some of his weakest tracks on it, which feels weird because it also has some of his best tracks on it. So considering this record is just so different from start to finish, it is pretty jarring to listen to it in one setting, all 15 tracks, and just go through the motions of so many genres. Is it very impressive that he's been able to bring all of these things together in a pretty cohesive way? Yes, but when you go from a track like Death that is just so metal inspired, very rap rock inspired, to say Love or Chemistry or Exile, which are so different in tone, or Lights 4444, which is this synth-laden trap type of song, or Real, which is this very vulnerable moment that has some of his best vocals on the entire record, I could go on. I immediately noticed from singles like Pretend and Fake Friend how he was also drawing inspiration from his emo and pop-punk roots. And then while Buck is pretty repetitive as a track, it definitely has the hype anthem feel. There are certainly common trends across this record, things that I noticed that were different. Even though Joe said that he was returning to his roots, there definitely is a change up with percussion where the beats will sound a lot more bassier and sort of driving and throttling. Listen to Buck, listen to Love or Chemistry, and especially listen to the track Blood with Kenny Hoopla, and you'll definitely get the feeling that the beats across this record vary quite prominently, and the driving percussion is something we haven't really heard that much from Nothing Nowhere in the past. I would be lying if I said that this record, from a stylistic place, from a lyrical place, from a production standpoint, doesn't feel very disjointed at times. But the core songwriting that has made Nothing Nowhere good up until this point is there. His usage of guitars, his usage of real percussion, and his ability to take all of these genres and make it into one record. I think there are a lot of tracks on this record that suffer from a repetition factor and not feeling nearly as lavish as everything else, and I'm not saying a stripped back approach is bad. Some of my favorite Nothing Nowhere tracks are very minimalistic in their approach, but tracks such as Exile are so unnecessary. This crooning trap rap, cloud rap inspired beat and auto-tune lathered across his vocals, it just repeats over and over and over. It is mind-numbing. And the single Upside Down, in my opinion, clearly the worst single that was dropped in anticipation, once again suffers from a repetition factor, not nearly having as strong of a lyrical component or songwriting as many other tracks here do. Sometimes here he's at his lyrical peak, he really does feel like he's on top of his game, and other times it feels like a tiny minuscule idea was stretched out to be an entire track. And when said tracks sometimes don't even reach the 3-minute mark, which in retrospect I'm glad they don't, it is very weird and it is very jarring when they're put shoulder to shoulder with some really strong songs. I would go so far as to say the mid half of this record to the late part of this record are the best parts. I think the first half really does struggle with the repetition factor, but it definitely does pick up around sort of Pain Place, which is an amazing collaboration, a great beat behind it, some great vocal refrains, a very much catchy chorus, and some lyrics that feel a lot more in line with what we have come to expect from Nothing Nowhere when he's at his lyrical best. Death is a rager. I would love to see Nothing Nowhere do more in this vein, considering from his roots of emo and of screamo and of post-hardcore and just all of those genres like pop punk and alternative rock, seeing him go in this direction and do it so effectively just leaves me hungering to hear more in this line. The singles Blood and Nightmare pop up back to back, and while they are very, very different in how they come across, they're both fantastic singles and really does go to show how Joe can just go to different genres and pretty much ace the test. I think Crave's sort of the bastard child of the latter half of the record, the one that sort of sinks it just a tiny bit. It is a very pretty track and I do enjoy the chord progression, but as a whole, as a track, I don't think it's one of his strongest love songs, and I think he has had better, and I think he has better on this record. While I'm not the biggest fan of Love or Chemistry, I think that that track does what Crave does, just better. But I will say that this record ends extremely strong with Real and Barely Bleeding, two of my favorite Nothing Nowhere songs at this point. He has a habit of really coming through with some great ending tracks, and Barely Bleeding, fantastic example of that. That chorus just hits like a ton of bricks. It's sharp, it's piercing, and the lead up to that has his usual drifting melancholic vocals in his higher register that I think he does a lot better than just his normal singing voice. And Real is a very retrospective track, and it really does say a lot about the pressure of fame, how he wasn't ready. And if you watch his sort of making of series for Trauma Factory, he definitely wasn't ready for fame, and that's something he hasn't really touched on a ton in his music. And Real was originally an unreleased track, so to see it on this record pop up in its full capacity is wonderful. It is my favorite track on this record for numerous reasons. I think it has a great production behind it, and I think lyrically it's one of the more important tracks Joe has ever come out with. Definitely one of his deepest when it comes to personal struggle, and I think that says a lot from an artist that primarily does songs about personal struggle. Trauma Factory is a very well-written record, and it is a very diverse record, and chances are when it comes to rap rock, when it comes to trap, when it comes to emo, hip-hop, when it comes to these genres that Nothing Nowhere plays in, whether we're talking about the shades of rock or indie or hip-hop, you're not really going to find many other artists that are going to be able to put the bar this high for so many genres and play around with them all on the span of one record. There's not really that many people that do what Nothing Nowhere is able to do, and I feel like there are a lot of pitfalls on this record, a lot of moments that sort of linger in the backdrop that sort of weigh this record down, bog it down, and I think trimming the fat a little bit for some of the lesser tracks on this track listing that clearly had a lot of minuscule ideas just being stretched out, if they were removed, I think that this could be an even better record. But as it stands, I am really glad that Nothing Nowhere is still putting out music, and I'm really excited to see how these sounds are played with in the future. But I definitely think this is his most disconnected record in terms of sounds and production, but I think you take that risk when you go into so many genres and different producers and things of that nature, especially when you're tampering with so many different genres at once, back to back to back to back to back and so on. In the future, I would just love to see these genres played with in a way that could bind them all together with some common denominator and not just feel like a bunch of scatterbrained ideas being tossed at the wall. Yes, a lot of them pan out, but some don't, and I think those are the lackluster moments. But for me as a whole, I'm going to be giving this album a 7 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Nothing Nowhere record, Trauma Factory? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.